Racism, Virtual Lunch and Learn. This is part of a series that the YW started some years ago in order to have constructive community conversations on important topics regarding race. Today, I'm delighted we have an absolutely wonderful panel of all-stars on this issue. We do ask that you understand this is a safe space where people can talk frankly, because as we know on these issues, there are many different facets and many different sides. We want to thank our presenting sponsor, Regions Foundation, who knows that these conversations are very important for us to have. Now I will introduce Shane Foster. He's Executive Director of Men Together Nashville. He is a nationally recognized expert on gender violence that is part of our Men Together program. Now I'll turn it over to Shane.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you all for being here today as we have this great conversation. I am so delighted to join this all-star group of panelists to have this conversation today. Our panelists will address the level of distrust of police that exists in many communities due to the history of racism in America, especially in communities of color. We will also discuss ways that policing can be changed to address the concerns of individuals in our community about present policing models. And without further ado, I just want to turn it over to our first panelist, Ms. Ashlee Davis, VP of Alliance Bernstein. Ashlee, tell us a little bit about yourself, Alliance Bernstein's commitment to diversity, and why addressing policing is important to your workforce. And how does Alliance Bernstein's commitment to addressing policing align with the Community Oversight Board, which you chaired this past year and remain an active board member?
Thank you, Shane. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Wish everyone a happy November. Hope everyone's staying safe and warm as best you can. I want to thank also Executive Director Roberson and the entire YWCA staff and executive team as well for the opportunity. And I'll be as succinct as possible here because All-Star actually just doesn't do justice to the incredible, look, we've got Avengers on this panel here today. So I'll be quite succinct here. Just a bit about myself. I've had the opportunity to share a bit about myself before, but just if I haven't had a chance to share with you, I'm a native Nashvilleian, proud of that. I don't have any tattoos. I hate needles, so I won't get any, but if I had one, it'd probably say 615 or it'd have a little map of Nashville. I love the fact that I'm from Nashville, feel quite blessed that I was born here, raised here, and that I'm a sixth generation, at least, a Nashvilleian. And that's a piece of me. I was raised in North Nashville, very close to the intersection of 33rd and Clifton. It's where I went to, not just was raised there, but also where I worshiped and grew up in the AME church, and my family as well. My family grew up and raised in that space there too. But what's most important too is that community has been important in this space for me and where I was raised. And I was taught from an early age that it's certainly not just about the grades you bring home. And yes, Ashlee, that's important. My parents taught me that. And yes, Ashlee, it's important about what you give to your community, but it's important what impression you leave on people. It's not just important that you meant well, Ashlee. You know, my mom would tell me all the time, Ashlee, yeah, you might have meant well, but what impression did you leave on people? And my dad would always say to me, you know, Ashlee, you always tell me you meant well, but that attitude of yours left people with a negative impression. And so what does that mean at the end of the day? And I think that's a lot of the lessons that we can all learn as we talk about policing, as we talk about community, as we talk about race, that we have well-intentioned individuals on both sides of both spaces, but the impression that is being left is not always the best. And so when we think about, and you ask about Alliance Bernstein, we do just that. We look at the difference between our intent and our impact, whether that's in community building and coalition, or we're thinking about our philanthropic giving. We don't just sit back on our own space and say, well, we'll let our name and our brand do the talking for us, but we think about the impact that we're having on the space that we take up. We moved to Nashville a little over 2 years ago from Wall Street. We're a 50-plus-year-old company. We're in 22 countries, over 3,800 employees. And I was not with AB before they moved to Nashville, but like many of you, Nashvillians and others on the line, I watched AB when they got to Nashville, and I wanted to see if they were going to try to be a big fish to come in here and tell us how they thought we should act. And so I watched to see how intentional they were, but we believe that inclusion must be intentional and a muscle that you flex. And that's just how we do our work here in this space. But we also are not open to, not immune to being wrong at times. And so we open our doors up to at times being told that we are doing things wrong and need to change. And so just lastly, I would just say, when you think about how we're aligned, that word community is at the front of all the things that we do at AB. And so I'm sure that you've likely, if you heard of AB, you've likely heard of some things that we've done in the community, and we're gonna do more of those things, whether it's working alongside and supporting Gideon's Army, or the work that we're doing more and more to figure out how we can be more present and be more impactful with MNPS. We want to do more, but we also want to be thoughtful and not just show up and write a check and walk away, because it's about relationships as well. And so I look forward to the conversation here today, but I hope and pray and know that we all know that there's a lot of work to be done, but the first step is realizing that we gotta be honest about the fact that we've got a lot of work to do here too.
Wow, already dropping some nuggets right here. Some things that really stuck out to me was not just intent, but looking at true impact, right? And that community matters, and opening our doors to say, you know what, there's going to be some times where we're going to get things wrong, and we're open to that feedback. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Juliana, Ospina, Cano, the Executive Director of Conexion Americas. You're up next. Tell us a little bit about yourself, the community members of Conexion Americas, and speak to the experiences of those you serve with respect to police in Nashville.
Absolutely. And hello, everyone. Buenas tardes. My name is Juliana Ospina Cano, Executive Director of Conexion Americas. As you mentioned, it's truly an honor to be here and have honest and candid conversations about the communities we serve. And I'm thrilled to dive a little deeper into the meaning of Latinx in relative to police and law enforcement. So it's good to be here. As you know, we are an 18-year-old organization housed at Casa Azafran. And I started in this position about a year and a half ago, and never in a million years thought that I would be serving my first year in the midst of a tornado, census threats, to having counted all of our people. And of course, I knew about the election and we knew what we were going to be facing, but of course, a pandemic. And I am proud of the work that we have been doing, pivoting our services to ensure that we repurpose the building to serve Black and Brown families in partnership with many of you, and Sabina, you are here, but more importantly, to contextualize the stories of Latinx families in the context of racial tensions. I will be talking a little bit more about our background, but we know that there are Afro-Latinos in our community, and we know that there are systemic issues that we need to tackle as a community. We serve 9,000 people in 36 counties, but I think my math is going to change once we do our final count after COVID-19, because we have noticed and we have realized that we are serving more people as a result of the pandemic. I'll be talking a little bit more about 287G and my lessons, having lived in Nashville, having lived in Atlanta for 10 years, and having lived in DC, working in the civil rights space for 5.5 years at the National Council of La Raza. And lastly, I feel compelled that to share about who I am. I'm Colombian, but I came to this country when I was 15, and it was because of people like the ones that we have at Conexion Americas that helped me succeed and to be here. So I carry privilege because of the color of my skin, because I speak English, but I represent a community that is diverse, and as we saw in the election, willing and ready to cast their votes in a very diverse way. So I can talk a little bit more about law enforcement and police, but it again, it's a pleasure to be here. And my dog, Guacamole, just walked in. His name. I'm hoping he doesn't start barking.
We're welcoming. Yeah, we're welcoming to dogs on here too. Thank you so much. It's so important, the work that you all are doing. And you talked a little bit about the systemic issues that are specifically facing the Latinx community. And we're going to get into more about that as well. But next we have up Sabina, Mohyuddin, Executive Director of American Muslim Advisory Council. Sabina, tell us a little bit about yourself and those you serve at the American Muslim Advisory Council, and speak specifically to the experiences of those you serve with respect to the police in Nashville as well.
Thank you, Shan, for having me here today, and for the YWCA putting together this wonderful panel. I've been looking forward to the discussion for a while now. And good afternoon to everyone who's joined us on this call. I'm the executive director of the American Muslim Advisory Council, but what people don't know that I always say is I was born and raised in Nashville, and growing up here in the 70s, 80s, just seeing the tremendous change in our community, and especially thinking about in the 90s and early 2000s, how the demographics of Nashville changed. In 2011, there was an anti-Sharia bill in the Tennessee State Legislature, and a group of Muslim leaders across the state kind of got together with our allies, and we fought against it. And we realized at that time that our community needed more than mosques. So we were across Tennessee, so many different mosques, worrying about the spiritual well-being of their community members, but there was really no institution to help fight Islamophobia or anti-Muslim racism. And so that's in 2012, we started the American Muslim Advisory Council, and it's a statewide organization. Most of the work has been in Middle Tennessee, but we are working to fight against all kinds of discrimination, Islamophobia, but really to empower the Muslim community. And whether that's through civic engagement, and of course, with the elections, we really, got our community out to vote and helping them understand the importance of our voice, and then community building. And I think that is one of the most important part of our missions, is building a community. That means strengthening our mosque and helping our community members understand how to work together and sometimes speak in a unified voice, but also educating the non-Muslim community about our community. So doing cultural competency trainings, and then better relations with the media so that Muslims are actually telling our own stories. So in Tennessee, as let's say, there's about 65,000 Muslims. In Middle Tennessee, there are estimated 40,000 Muslims. And in Nashville, there are 9 different mosques. And communities we serve, like the Kurdish community, is about 15 to 20,000 in Middle Tennessee. It's the largest Kurdish community in the US. The Somali community, about 5,000. And then you're talking about Muslims from across the world. My parents are from Bangladesh, South Asians, Arabs. We have African American Muslims. Actually, 2 mosques serve the African American community. And so we are a very diverse community. And AMAC has kind of been that resource where people who have issues, whether it's discrimination, hate crime, they know they can call us and get help. And so, we've seen issues in the community in terms of policing, and so, I'll go further into those issues later, but it's really, we are a resource for the Muslim community when they need something or they need help, being able to turn them to the right direction. It's been a pleasure for me to get to know my community more through this work, and see how they really want to be a part of the community, be seen and heard.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I resonate so much with what you said about community needing more. right? Needing to be empowered, needing to build bridges, right? And that's part of what we're talking about today in respect to the police system and its impact on the community. And our next panelist is one I know can speak to some of this as well. Mr. Larry Turnley, who is a violence interrupter for Gideon's Army. Larry, tell us a little bit about yourself. Obviously, another Nashville native. Tell us a little bit about those you serve, specifically with Gideon's Army, and speak to the experiences of those you serve in respect to the Nashville Police.
Oh, well, first, thank you all for this opportunity to be on this panel. And yes, I'm a member of Gideon's Army. I'm a violence interrupter as well as the reentry coordinator, which, you know, those two jobs are very trying at times because, you know, when dealing with the vulnerable community, you know, sometimes you deal with the worst of their personalities and their characters. So you got to see through all that and be tolerant. So with that, I'm a returned citizen, which I served 20 years in federal prison after being sentenced to life in 1996. When I got out in 2016, I started an annual Thanksgiving Day dinner at in JC Napier, which last year we fed over 1,000 people. And as I was speaking on earlier, it seemed like with the COVID, we're gonna have to do a whole lot of things different this year. However, Saturday we do plan on putting some smiles on some faces in the JC Napier community. And you know, we're getting his arm. Our whole mission is boots on the ground. Boots on the ground. We serve the homeless community. We serve the victims of the 2020 tornado that happened in March. We also serve victims of violent crimes, in particular, gun violence, and the disenfranchised. And we also in the schools, we're in the courts, we're in politics, so to speak, because one of our members, Jamel, is on the Community Oversight Board. And, you know, we just believe in just being there for our people when, in most cases, they feel that they have been forgotten. And the experiences of the people that we come in contact with, their experiences with the police, most of them feel as if there's no accountability. They feel that, you know, for people who come through acting as if they're guardians, if they can sit and tell you what you can and can't do, but then they not held accountable for their actions, you know, it's like a slap in the face, and then it just causes you know, negative connotations when you do see the police, because in most instances, when they come to take one of the community members away, you know. So, you know, our motto is boots on the ground. And again, thank y'all for having me.
LT, we definitely appreciate that perspective. Boots on the ground is what is needed when it comes to communities, particularly in communities of color. And one who is no stranger to boots on the ground work is our next panelist, John Drake, who is the Interim Chief of Police with Metro Nashville Police Department. Chief Drake, tell us a little bit about yourself and the Metro Nashville Police Department's role in this conversation on racism.
Well, good afternoon, Shane, and everyone that's tuned in. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. To all the panelists, thank you for your input. Thank you for what you do for our community. I'm a native Nashvilleian. I'm born and raised right here, grew up in East Nashville, went to the public school system, went to East High School, was a 3-sport letterman, went to Cleveland Street Baptist Church. My father was blind. My mother was disabled. So I pretty much raised myself. From the age of about 10 years old, I was cutting grass and doing yard work and all that to provide for my family. And really my first interaction with the police department as a kid was when I went to the funeral of one of my cousins who was actually killed by 3 members of this very police department I work for. And so I started doing things in the community, getting a lot of respect, helping to mentor other kids in my high school. Got an article in the Tennessean about the things I was doing and how I was helping people. And I had one of my relatives that asked me, hey, if you want to broaden that platform, let's become police officers. And we both put in for it, and he didn't get hired. He got hired a year later, and I came on, and the rest has been history. I spent almost 33 years on the police department, started in 1988. And my role is to make sure that we deliver a fair and equitable and inclusive service to all our citizens. And so from day one, I've been trying to make sure that we are inclusive, we engage our community, that we get to know people. We don't want to go in as the warrior mindset, as they say, and go in and remove people and they don't know who we are. So we feel if we can have community engagement, get to know people, let them know who we are, then we can build and embrace relationships. Also, looking at our role in racism is how we vet our police officers, how we train our police officers. What are we giving them? What tools? Are we teaching them ethics? And we are. Are we teaching them about biases? We are, implicit and explicit, and how to treat people, how to have incident decision-making in critical situations, and having that mindset, and then having the escalation at the forefront of what we do. A lot of incidents we see around the country, I feel are through a sense of urgency, and officers are actually escalating situations. And so from my training academy all the way through, that's been our focus.
Thank you so much for that. And so much of that, I think, is ringing the ears of not only our panelists, but also our guest today, talking about training that's specific for officers, and talking about implicit versus explicit bias, talking about de-escalation training, all of these things that are important, particularly for our officers who are serving and protecting our community. I want to go back to Ashlee. As a high-performing African-American who is very visible, there's a difference in your experience with police in relations to other family members who may not be given the same respect. Can you speak to that difference and also share your thoughts when you hear me say the intersection of racism and policing? What does that mean to you?
Sure. Well, the difference in my experience with police due to my visibility is, it's the epitome of privilege, right? Juliana touched on that already. It's the definition of it. But to be honest with you, unless I'm standing with my dad, my uncle, my sisters, my mom at the same time, to be honest with you, that privilege really amounts to nothing, I think, because quite frankly, your privilege really, it extends only in that moment. And if we can't protect those around us, and especially our community, what is it worth? What is it for? Also, quite frankly, that's why all of us are doing the work that we do. And let's be honest, also in a year like 2020, where quickly we all become quite the same with a mask over our face. That mask, not a lot of people know who Ashlee Davis is when I'm wearing a mask to cover my face. I am quickly I'm a Black person. And we know also as we walk in a store, what a privilege it is now to be able to safely go into a space. And so when I think about privilege, and it's oftentimes a word that many of us shy away from even talking about, it makes us uncomfortable, but it's necessary to discuss, because the intersection of racism and policing, when I think about that, I think about, honestly, a 16-wheeler doing 90 miles per hour on a black ice highway with no brakes. It is inevitable that it's going to crash into each other, because we've been on this pathway for years. We've been avoiding it, yes, but it needs to happen. It's a conversation we have to have, and it's also actions we have to have. And I appreciate what the conversation, I believe that when Mr. Turnley's talking about, like, on the grassroots, on the ground, but also when Chief Drake talks about the space about training, and then you heard also when you hear Sabina talking about the community The truth is, and we've all been a part of this police commission over the last few weeks, we know all of this is weaving together, it's woven together, but also, quite frankly, Nashville has not been able to come to terms with a lot of this, because honestly, we don't want to admit that we have a systemic racism problem. Like, this racism is sitting in our housing space, it's sitting in our education space, and within the policing space, we feel as if we say that we have racism sitting in every section of our police force, that somehow that means we have bad police officers. No, it doesn't mean we have bad police officers. It means that we have to be there for our police officers to assist them in getting to the right space. And I've been honest, both in the space where I've been chair of those subcommittees, in those spaces where we went to the academy, to be very honest in the space of saying that you make mistakes just like we do. The only difference, I think, here, quite frankly, is that you have an accountability in a different space, in a different higher accountability, because you wear that badge and you have that gun. But that racism and that policeism and that intersection of the two, I can't think of a stickier, more uncomfortable space. And there are other phrases as well that make people uncomfortable. When we talk about defunding the police and what that means, it makes people incredibly uncomfortable. But let's be honest, the more we avoid talking about things like that without saying what that means, we can't get to those solutions. And that's why that police commission was important too. And I'm excited for the community to read that report from the beginning to the end, because at the end of it, I hope too, you see the different opinions of the group. There was a lot of people and a lot of perspectives on there. And trust me, we weren't all aligned, but that's what you need. You need diverse opinions in there to see that sometimes we don't have to agree, but we absolutely need to come to the table there. And I do think, and just in closing here, when we think about like the future of all of this coming together, this intersection of race and policing, there has to be an understanding too that we can't check ourselves, and our police have to be willing to be comfortable with. And I appreciate Chief Drake welcoming the COB to come in and say, we're going to sit alongside you here and work on these things together. And Gideon's Army is a great example of just that, of saying we have our ear to the ground every single day of what's going on. So invite us in to have these conversations. It can't just be, well, we've got it, we're going to close the door and handle our house and get it in order. We've got to be honest about the fact that the people on the ground know best about what's going on. It's just truly, it's got to be an open door policy, I believe. But I welcome dissenting opinions. I do it. I wouldn't have gone to law school if I didn't. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for that perspective. You brought up some really good points about the need to talk about privilege, the need to talk about accountability, particularly in certain spaces, and the need to really just be honest, right? That when we think about policing, there's an entire history that goes along with what we're seeing play out in communities, and everybody makes mistakes, right? And we need to be able to talk about the level of accountability that comes with wearing that badge. So thank you. I appreciate that perspective. Juliana, we're going to talk with you next, and really want to hear, the Latinx community's experiences, racial profiling, hate crimes, and many Nashville residents live in constant fear of deportation. When you hear me say the intersection of racism and policing, what comes to mind for you, and how has history contributed to what you're seeing happening today?
Yeah, and then for some context setting, right? 1 out of 10 Nashvilleians wasn't born in the United States, right? So we have that. But we have a population that has been here in the Nashville and Tennessee area. 65% of them have been here since 2000. I am one of them. And many of us lived in mixed status families. So when we think that all immigrant origin families, and we put them in a category, in a bucket, say that all of them are afraid and scared of deportations. Yes, for many of us, that is the case. But we're also concerned about police brutality, equity, training, safety, neighborhoods. And I love what Abby put in the chat box, where for us, it goes deeper and further than the coffee, than the bagels, than the informal communication that we have with the Latinx community. For example, the Protector program was a great initiative to begin establishing those relationships, but then we found out that this person voted and was in favor of an English-only referendum in the city. So when actions are not congruent with behaviors, and I like what you said, Shan, that we all make mistakes, but when we know better, we do better. And for me, 2020 is that opportunity to look inward and see how do we better facilitate these conversations, but also equate them with policy. We know in Nashville, and again, I lived here in 2010 for 4 years, went to DC and came back. And what I have noticed is that not much has changed. Still those biases and asking folks when they're pulled over by the police for their country of origin, that is a specific request and information that folks shouldn't be asking, because that is something that is going to label the perception, implicit or explicit biases against that individual. And the city has worked hard pushing, right, for policy changes. I was part of the immigration task force. I was part of the other policing task force, but we need to make sure that policy actually translates into action. And immigrants and Latino and immigrant origin families, I think this might sound trivial for many of you, but we don't operate in a vacuum where the narrative doesn't impact our daily behaviors, where every single day we are told we are rapists, we're criminals, we're not welcome here. When my own mom is afraid, my mom, who looks like me, is afraid of speaking Spanish at the grocery store because someone might label her, then we have an issue, right? So for us, it's having these conversations, but as Ashlee mentioned, looking at the data, looking at the report. The Oversight Committee has done an amazing job really putting those practices and those pieces in a way that we can all understand it. But the narrative at the national and the state level is not helping us, right? So for us is making sure that we have those conversations, but also we analyze our own way in the way that we've been training police officers to really interact with immigrant origin communities.
Thank you for that. You bring up so many great points as we think about, when we know better, we should do better, right? But sometimes we don't. And particularly as we think about policies, we think about procedures, we think about training, that implicit and explicit bias training is really important, because when people are being pulled over, those questions that come out really do matter, right? And they go a long way when done the wrong way. Sabina, we're coming to you next, and we would like for you to talk a little bit about, the Muslim community has played a significant role in racial justice and human rights, but has also been the victim of racial profiling, harassment, and hate crimes. When you hear me say the intersection of racism and policing, what comes to mind for you, and how has history contributed to what you're seeing today as well?
So it's interesting why we're talking about the Muslim community. Obviously, it's not a racial group, but what has happened over time is the racialization of Muslims. So everyone sees our community, no matter how diverse we are, as one single monolithic group, and that's Muslims. And with that comes all the stereotypes, the stereotype of being inherently violent. A stereotype of being the somehow community that can't be assimilated, is somehow a fifth column, and then historically what has happened and still happening is then you have mass surveillance of our community, and it's always a conversation with Muslims and interaction with law enforcement is, will this lead to greater surveillance? Are they taking our names? Are we being put on some kind of terrorist watch list? I mean, these are real concerns community members have. And another part you have to remember is all the issues with policing that African-American communities face. Muslim communities, our identities overlap. So we have African-American Muslims who've been here for generations, but then we have Black immigrant Muslims, Somalis, Ethiopians, who experience the same things that, like the report Driving While Black talked about. And so we have communities kind of experiencing these forms of racism in different ways. And what I hear back from the community is they feel like our communities are not prioritized by the police. And so, and that when talking about, let's say, response time in terms of, reporting a crime, how long does it take to hear back from the police? Or if a crime was committed, are they getting updates with how the case is going? And is it eventually being solved, or do they know about it? And so that's some of the things that I'm hearing about in our community. So, it's just kind of, it's some of this push and pull. There's experience people have from back home, their interactions with law enforcement, what it is, and coming here and what they expect. And there's built-in distrust, the Islamophobia, the rhetoric, whether it's from the president or the government, just being seen as this threat to the community. And this is work that we have to change.
Thank you so much for that. One of the things that really struck me when you said it is, the racialization of Muslims bringing about stereotypes. That's so important to think about in relation to what we're talking about here in terms of policing in communities. LT, I know you know something about stereotypes and the effects that they have on our community. Talk a little bit about, what it means to you when you hear me say the intersection between racism and policing.
What I hear when you say that is like where they cross, or where they meet up at. However, I believe that, racism and policing are two of the same, because they was birthed at the same time. It was a racist or a white supremacist idea, which was slavery, and through slavery, where we had the slave catchers that was the first police. Then from there, when slavery was so-called ended and turned into the 13th Amendment, we needed police officers to be able to carry out or control those people who were, newly free. So that's when the Black codes came in. So with the Black codes, we all know the history on that right there. However, I just don't see a intersection. What I see is going from ruling with an iron fist to ruling with an iron fist inside a velvet glove. And I can bring it up to how I can see the history going on from that today, which is from the Black codes. You look at the Black codes and everything it entails, and then look at a person getting out on probation. It's the same thing. You got the same tenets or some of the same conditions or criteria mixed in with those people who are getting out of prison, or just people who grew up, who live in economic disadvantaged communities. So I would say that the racism that's taking place, which I see with the vagrancy laws, where they forced you to go to work. Now we fast forward up today, you got people who are on child support. They forcing you to work on wages that are menial to take care of yourself and, pay child support where, somebody had to get assistance from the government. So when you see that, it's like a person got an option of, do I work for free or for a little bit or don't work at all? So it's like, what options do, what kind of option really is that? So now that forces people to have to, you know, deal with the police, because if you don't pay child support, the judge gonna put out a warrant. Now you got to deal with police and go to jail, which is going right back into slavery, as opposed to coming up with some better ideas, as opposed to just being reactive. And I feel like that's all that's going on with the laws that's designed. Yeah, the police can be looked at as a scapegoat for the failure of the government, because the government, they enact some of these laws, which they know that these laws are based on white supremacy or based on pro-corporation as opposed to for the people. So it's like, you know, the police kind of like in between a rock and a hard place, but at the same time, you know, they still must conduct themselves, or they still must have some type of fairness in their decisions. So when you say that, I know a little brother who tried to get on with the Metro Police Department. They wouldn't let him get on with the Metro Police Department because he was honest with them and told them that when he was young, he held some drugs for his cousin. He wasn't caught with the drugs or anything, just volunteered this information. By him volunteering this information, they didn't give him the job. Now, fast forward on up to a couple of weeks ago, a police officer was decommissioned after, you know, knowing that he murdered a community member. But the only difference was he was white. The little brother who told them that he held some drugs for his cousin was black. He had to go to Memphis and get a job. And I say all that to say, you know, with black codes, we can go to Jim Crow. Jim Crow made it 100% separation, black and white. Fast forward to Nashville, in 2013, 85% of the officers was white. Now, that's just 15% different from the enactment of Jim Crow. Now, come up to today, it's 75% white. So it's when we fought to get blacks on police forces, people gave their lives, people were murdered just to get blacks in law enforcement. That's how blacks was able to get in law enforcement. It was the people that protest and sacrifice their life for blacks to be in this position. But then when they get in this position, they go silent. So we got to ask ourselves, what's wrong? Is it something wrong with the people? Is it something wrong with the system? So I would like to say it's something wrong with the system, to where brothers can't speak up when they see misconduct taking place. And it's the same way with our Muslim family, as well as, you know what I'm saying, our Hispanic family, who get officers who are Hispanic, or they get officers who are Muslim. However, it has no impact because nobody is speaking out on wrongdoing. So it got to be the culture, and it got to be the system, and the system need to be changed some type of way. You know what I'm saying? Or the only thing we're gonna keep doing is putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm. We ain't gonna get no kind of, you know what I'm saying, results if we keep going down this same thing. So going back from black codes, Jim Crow, I just say we need to go back to Reconstruction, when everything was supposed to have been taken care of. It was never taken care of. We need to go back to that right there, and let's address these issues head on, because that's what all the protests and all the riots is going on today is all about. People want fairness.
Thank you.
So
and
right
we're gonna get to some solutions and what we see as the call to actions. We appreciate certainly giving some history and some background to how we've gotten to this place now, that the issues as it relates to racism and policing didn't start in 2020, right? They started a long time ago and have come up to things that we're seeing play out in community now. Chief Drake, I'd love to hear you kind of weigh in. You know, once slavery was abolished, we just heard a lot about the history, but once slavery was abolished, there was a need to reconstruct policing practices. Can you speak to the history of policing post-slavery and share the strategic direction policing has taken today?
Yeah, absolutely. The history of policing hasn't always been on the right side of law. As you said, it began with slave patrols. After that ended, it still had oppressive tactics. There were people that were prosecuted and put in prison for years without any evidence. Those people, some are getting cleared today. There's been a history of brutality. There has been a history of racism. As I said in the very beginning, my first interaction with this police department was actually one of my relatives that had been harmed. And actually, you know, as a kid, I remember being recruited by some colleges and had called into to the guidance counselor's office. I'm thinking it's two college football recruiters and it's two guys from the police department here that were looking for someone that committed a violent crime. And they told me, you look just like the guy. And they showed me a picture and I said, no, all Black people don't look alike. And so they said, we have a fingerprint that can clear you. And so they took me down and the whole time they told me if they didn't have this fingerprint, they could probably make a circumstantial case against me. So they did the fingerprint down at the old juvenile building where the Howard building is, and I was cleared. And eventually they caught the person and it looked nothing like me. And so when you look at the history of policing post-slavery, you look at the Jim Crow laws, you look at the brutality, Rodney King, other incidents around the country, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, a lack of having treating people as people. And so with policing, it started with reactive policing. You take a call, you go, you answer this call, and then you leave. You make an arrest, or it left a lot of people with a void in their households. Then policing became, let's try to prevent crime. Let's do proactive policing. Let's go in, let's make Terry stops, let's make traffic stops. Let's stop people that are standing on the corner, standing on their porch, search their pockets, look for evidence of crime, and then try to make a case on petty cases. And so really that was victimizing people as well. And so the direction that we're going in now is community engagement. And that's just being out in the community. That's getting to know people. Instead of going on someone's porch and trying to shake them down, but going on their porch to say, hello, this is who I am. And this is how I can help you. And by the way, who are you? How can we partner together? How can we do this? We want to have ice cream giveaways. We want to have movie nights. We want to have mentoring with kids. We do that, especially with COVID and kids having virtual learning. We've had officers actually go to community centers to tutor kids. And we're actually looking at partnering with the Tennessee Titans on how we can actually do more of that. We had someone that came to us about a soccer field, a chance for us to put one in Midtown Hills and then even bring other communities together. I think it's gonna be really good. When you look at policing, they made homelessness a crime, right? If you're homeless, you have mental illness, drug addictions, alcohol addictions, and you're gonna be arrested. Some of them are arrested over 200 times. So one of the first things that I did was establish a quality of life team. And the quality of life team is to work with displaced individuals to connect them to services to where they can get help. They can get help for their drug addiction. We can partner with the Salvation Army, the Homeless Impact Division, and it's working wonders for what we're having. The Central Precinct area, for one, the crime was really, really way up, and a lot of it was just nuisance activities. And so with the community engagement and connecting people to services, instead of them going to jail and being arrested, they're actually being connected to services. And so one of the things we're looking at too is a crisis intervention co-response. And so if we can team plainclothes officers with mental health experts to go out in the community on these calls for crisis intervention, then we can actually create a de-escalation, because this uniform actually escalates situations. So we can help with that as well. Being inclusive and welcoming the COB, trying to be a part of them because they were overwhelmingly supported by Nashvillians, and I overwhelmingly support them as well. But one thing that we have with the COB is legitimacy and trust that we build in the community. And that's one of the main assets that we need for embracing these relationships with the community. Another thing that I'm doing is I created a chief diversity officer. He's a captain, which is a high-ranking member of our police department. He's Hispanic. But so our chief diversity officer is gonna have conversations with the COB, with NOAA, with the Hispanic community, the Kurdish community. So under his direction, we have the Office of Community Engagement. And so we're gonna have officers from the Kurdish and Muslim community, Hispanic, Black, African-American, Laotian, and others, so we can build more connections, more relationships with communities. And I think that's gonna serve us tremendously well. And then last but not least, our police department is 73% white. And I realize that's a problem. And I realized that from day one. We only have 24 African-American female officers and only 156 female officers total and 211 minority officers. So the first thing we started was a recruitment unit. So when people wanted to sign up for the police department, they would go in, click on a link, find us, and then they were excluded for whatever reason, going through a process. And so what we did was build a diverse recruitment unit, Hispanics, Black, female, male, and so they can actually have proactive conversations with people. And then these officers can actually have conversations with them and actually recruit them like athletes to say, hey, we want you on our police department. We want to build diversity. That's the whole crux of putting a recruitment unit together. And then once we build a diverse group of officers, then we can promote through the system. So we can have sergeants, lieutenants, et cetera, throughout the entire police department. And it all starts with recruitment. And so that's the direction that we're going. I think it's going to be great for the community. So a lot of other things we're doing as well, but I think that's going to be some real good positives.
Thank you so much for that. And I think it's just so important to hear what things, what solutions, what tools, what resources, what training is in place right now to help things be better, right? And so what I would like to do before we go to questions from the audience, I know we're going to go a little bit over, but this is just such a great conversation and much needed conversation that I think we all have really been waiting to be able to have. So what I would like each panelist to do is to just give me 30 seconds. What's your call to action with respect to your community, with respect to policing in communities? What is your call to action? Ashlee, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. My call to action would just be, kind of goes back to what a lot of us learned growing up. I think it would be give up one of the three things, right? Your time, your talents, and I'd like to throw in the talk too. So share what you know. And I think LT gave a great example of that. You know, when you share what you've come across, what you've learned, what you've been educated on by yourself. Some of us don't have the time because we are working several jobs. Some of us have talents, however, that we can extend to our community. And then some of us have a gift of gab of being able to share a message and others will listen to us. And there's a report coming out that I think many of us need to take the time to read and figure out what we agree with, what we disagree with. And then we need to get with our leaders, those that represent us, and make our voices heard. We need to make sure our mayor hears from us, our city leaders hear from us, our chief of police hears from us so that they can know exactly where we stand from. And just very quickly, lastly, count yourself in and not out, right? There's not enough representation that looks like us. And there's too many of us that say, well, I haven't gone to this school, or I'm not bright enough, or I don't have enough money. We need more of us on those spaces. And so as you watch those city council meetings, think about the fact that their time will come up when they've got to run for those seats. They need to be running against you. Take those seats up and start to make sure that they represent our voices, which means maybe it's your voice representing us. It's high time that we have a change of the guard. and that we have representation that actually reflects the voices of those that have been sitting in the crowd for far too long, in my opinion.
Thank you so much for that. Juliana?
I was thinking about this as we close, is what kind of city and community do we want to live? That if we see a police officer or law enforcement, instead of feeling safe and secure, many families feel the opposite. Scared, they lock their doors, they say a prayer, and they say, I really don't know what is going to happen next. And it's up to us, as Ashlee just mentioned, to change the narrative and to look at all of us, our behaviors, and how we make sure that there is a pipeline. Just for context, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but when 287G was implemented, that was 13 years ago. And while it ended in 2012, those kids, many of them who were born in this country, are 13 years old now, and in 5 years are going to be able to vote. And when they think about police and when they think about law enforcement, what memories do they have about those exchanges when they were pulled over, or when they saw their dad being pulled over and randomly seeing that it was ICE and no information and no context there? So for us is to look ahead, but as Ashlee mentioned, making sure that we invest in policies today that reflect the needs and the aspirations of our community. There's too much at stake right now as we close 2020, and the work is just getting harder as we look into 2021.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate those comments. Sabina?
Yes, so going forward, we really need better cultural competency training within the police department. We have some for the cadets, but on a yearly basis, those who are already serving as officers need to understand the community. We want our community to feel like this is their police department, not that they're being policed by another group. And that they feel like they're working together to improve the security of their communities. We talk about having better recruitment and the officers reflecting the communities they serve. And it's a little bit of the chicken and the egg in terms of until you build the trust, it's going to be hard to recruit from those community. And so looking into the diverse officers in the community and seeing what is their job satisfaction. Are they experiencing discrimination or biases? And so really, taking care of the officers who are there, and because they would be your greatest recruitment tool in those communities. If they're happy, if they see this as a career they want to stay in, then they can speak best for it.
Thank you so much. LT?
Yes, again, I would just like to go back to us having a reconstruction moment, us going back and righting the wrongs of where it all started. And then from there, addressing poverty, addressing mental health, addressing affordable housing. Because once you address all those things, then you deal with crime. Crime will be not eliminated, but it definitely will be decreased. And us being innovative, we just can't keep on doing the same thing. If law enforcement can use unscrupulous people to help them on investigations, then why come the community can use unscrupulous people to help them bring down gun violence, or to help them bring on some type of harmony or some type of unity inside of these communities, where in most cases it's the unscrupulous people that are looked up to by the community. So we just got to find a way to where when we go in these communities, we just don't deal with children and deal with the elderly. We got to find out a way how we can build some kind of bridge with those that we may be afraid of, we may look at as being a thug or being a problem. They may be the individual that can, have a powerful impact. Because look at myself, I was shot by the police. I done been, arrested for shooting at the police. So, we just can't judge a book by the cover and think, that, because a person may have done this or may have done that, that they unrepairable. we all know, we all in time will, if we're allowed, we all know what I'm saying, can be redeemed, and we can have an impact on our communities.
Thank you so much for that. And Chief Drake.
So what I would say is the same as pretty much everyone else, is that we need people to get involved. Let's get off the sidelines. Let's get in the game. Let's get everyone involved, and let's work together. One of the first things I did was I reached out to Rashida with Gideon's Army, and we had no interaction prior to me sitting in this seat with Gideon's Army and looking at violence interruption. So reaching out to people that we haven't traditionally reached out to try to achieve goals. And so our violent crime is up. So how do we do that? So we get with people and we interact and we have communication and we help. We have collaborations. We need people to report any kind of misconduct. If they don't feel comfortable reporting it to us, report it to the COB. I feel that's a great arm to go to. Let us get to know you as well. And we want to get to know you. And these partnerships. So let me give you an example. I went to talk at Plaza Mariachi and I met Ms. Diane Jabash. And she told me, she said, I want to partner with you. And so what I've done is the events that she's had at Plaza Mariachi, I've gone out to. I've met her and her husband. I've provided officers and just try to build those connections. I've talked to Muhammad Hassan and trying to establish a rapport with the Kurdish and the Muslim community. That's one of the reasons why I have Carlos Lara as the Chief Diversity Officer, so we can establish those connections. We have a Kurdish officer, Nopal Ahmad, who is going to be very active in establishing a rapport with communities. So it is that we're trying to build trust. We're trying to build these connections, and that's beginning now. And not just with the professional athletes. We have the Predators that are going to be delivering meals with us, the Titans and other people, but we want to make the connections with the community. So that's my call to action, is that we all get involved together. This is how we're going to make Nashville better. This is how we're going to make our police department better. It's all together.
Awesome, awesome. Such an incredible panel. And before we close this out, I do want to take at least 2 questions that we got from the chat. And this is for anybody on the panel to answer. The first question is, the phrase defund the police seems like a very unfortunate choice of words. Is it more about how funds are spent, or how funds should be used? Anybody can take that question.
So I'll take that one, and anyone else too. For when I look at defund, I look at the reallocation of funds. So people would like to see, say, mental health, that we don't respond to those, that social workers only respond to that, or mental health workers. And so that would move monies out of our budget into social service or social worker to respond to those kind of calls. But those calls are actually dangerous calls. And so as we've talked to mental health experts, they don't want to respond to these incidents by themselves. They want to respond with us. And so that's why I said we would have a co-response model to where we could team together with plainclothes officers to try to keep from escalating a situation. When you look at the police department and you think about cutting funding, we're allocated for 1,511 officers. We're 84 officers short. And for a city our size, we need at least 300 more officers to keep our city safe. That's how short staffed we are. And so when you start taking funding away, which 90% of our funding is personnel, then we start losing people. And so really the way I look at defunding is reallocation for other services. I would love to see us get to a point to where we don't respond to traffic crashes, that we have a civilian arm that responds to traffic crashes that doesn't involve injury. So officers can be more in the community, engaging and servicing people, opposed to those types of calls. And that's how I look at it. And I'll let someone else go too if they want.
Okay, so we'll get to the second question, which is, thank you for your work and today's discussion. One could argue that a key part of the solution is empowering diverse, historically underrepresented voices in leadership and decision-making. By definition, this means white people taking a bit of a step back to make room for new people and perspectives. How can white people have the biggest positive impact in a way that balances stepping up to be a part of the solution and stepping back to make room for more diverse voices? Anyone can answer that question.
I'm happy to kick this off too. I was unmuted there to answer the first one there, but I'll focus in on the second one here. I think it's a great question. First, that question and even the realization takes a lot of courage and awareness, because there are a lot of our I just say our neighbors who are our white brothers and sisters in this space who just will not admit that they do not have the courage to sit and be still and listen and to give the mic up. And I like to say a lot of times that we even need to build a bigger table, or a lot of people just need to get up and give their seat at the table to others, because for far too long, it's not just underrepresented, it's the fact that we haven't even been at the table. We haven't even known that the meetings are going on. They say a lot of times we've been on the menu. We have literally been on the menu and been up for grabs. So one, it takes that courage and that acknowledgement of your privilege. And then two, I think it takes educating yourself. A lot of what LT was talking about when we talk about Reconstruction and just this acknowledgement of the history of this country, and we're just talking about this country, not this world, about the creation of the KKK the same year that slavery was abolished in this country. It takes a reckoning of the fact that there are systems hundreds of years in place that we're pushing up against, and an acknowledgement also that this is going to be very uncomfortable. You are going to feel fatigued. It is like you are on a, a treadmill going at the highest rate with no stop in mind, but it is purposeful work. So the question is, before you even get started, are you committed to it? And I like to ask people all the time, before you use the word, I'm an ally in this word, before you can use that as a noun, you need to be willing to say to yourself, am I able to say that I've used it as a verb? And I really truly believe allyship should and has to be a verb before it can ever be a noun. You have to be able to say and point to what you've done before you can say who you are. And so when I'm speaking to people who are white, who are saying, I know that I take up a lot of air in the space. Well, you probably take up even more oxygen than you're aware of, even in that space. The question is now, are you willing now to hold your breath here and give your oxygen to this space? And that does come back to time, talent, and again, talking and being quiet in this space. And how are you going to activate your privilege? When you're showing up in spaces, are you willing to lose friends? Are you willing now to give your resources to organizations that are going to uplift others? And if you don't know where to start, clearly you have organizations sitting right here in this panel, in the space there, that are ready right now to activate that, right? There's where your money needs to go. It is easy like that. You can do it right now from your phone, so you have no excuse. The question also is, where you're going to get fatigued and stop, because 2020 was just the beginning of a decade that is the rest of our lives. It is going nowhere. Even after this vaccine, this is going nowhere. So I'll go on mute here because I'm sure my colleagues here on the panel have more to say on.
Anyone else want to answer that? If not, thank you so much. My hat goes off to this incredible panel. This has been so well worth the time, and you all dropped so many gems and nuggets, and just thank you for holding space for this critical conversation. This has been the Stand Against Racism virtual lunch and learn entitled Public Safety, right? Public safety in a time of crisis. I can't tell you how much we appreciate this. This has been presented by Regions Foundation of Tennessee. Thank you so much. Our panelists has been Ashlee Davis, Juliana, Cano, Sabina Mohyuddin, Larry Turnley, and Chief John Drake. Thank y'all so much again for participating in this panel. We look forward to seeing you all the next time. Have a good evening.
Thank you as well.
Take care, everybody.